Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with me. I'm your host, Rosie Gilmoss. And joining me, I have an American guest. I've got Eva Spiegel, who's joining me from California. Now, Eva and I, we've known each other in sort of internet friend terms for quite a long time. We both were widowed in 2018, and we both joined the Hot Young Widows Club, which was a wonderful, slightly tongue-in-cheek group that has morphed, and it became a closed group, and so lots of us are still in it, and it's changed names. I won't bore you with all the details, but it means that Eva and I have sort of run parallel to each other on this journey, and this is the first time I've actually got to speak to her. So I'd say give a warm welcome, but she won't be able to hear you, but a very warm welcome to Eva. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We finally got you on the podcast. We've had lots of toing and froing, haven't we? We got here in the end. So finally, I get to sit opposite you and I get to ask you some questions and find out a little bit more about Terry. So I know very little about him. I know he was enormous. How was he? 6'10"?
He was 6'10".
That's a ridiculously tall man. How tall are you?
And I was 5'10". I've lost an inch, but I will tell you a funny story, which is I'm tall and always preferred tall men.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I really want to find a tall person. And the morning after our second date, we were walking down the street together, and I knew immediately he was my person. And I remember thinking, I wanted somebody tall. I did not think I was going to get freakishly tall. I mean,
and you've got a son as well, haven't you? And I know he was coming up 10 when his dad died, which is a really shitty age. And I will go back into that, but he's enormous as well, isn't he?
Well, I think he's about 6'5".
Gosh.
I don't know how to measure kilos, but he's very thin. He's probably about 155 pounds.
Just total string bean.
He's a total string bean. And he is really this funny combination of the two of us. It's amazing.
Yeah.
When you look at your children,
oh yeah,
you've lost your spouse, and you see them physically in the child, right? And
yeah.
so it's kind of.
And I've got a giant child myself. I've got a 6'2", 14-year-old. So
oh my goodness.
I know, right? I know.
Yeah.
He's still got growing to go. Anyway, we digress, Eva. Look, we're going straight in. So, Eva, tell me about Terry. All I know is that you were together for 20 years, and I know that he died. So, give me a little more.
So we actually were together for 20 years, 2 months and 4 days.
That's pretty precise. Have you got the hours?
I met him walking down the street, or actually in a cafe, after I'd seen him walking down the street in my neighborhood for several months. And one day we were in the same cafe, and I asked him how tall he was, which normally would be an annoying question to somebody who was 6'10". But he smiled, and we started chatting, and we talked about being tall and finding clothes for tall people. I'm tall. My father was 6'4¼ at his full height. He's now elderly and shrinking. And so we just chatted about that. And from the conversation, I figured out that he'd probably be there in that same cafe the same time the following week. And I made sure I was there, and he made sure he was
there. A little bit of light stalking on both sides. I like it.
Yeah. And he asked for my number, and he, the week after, when I bumped into him again, and he called the next day, and we went out that Friday night. And then the next day, I was going to the movies with some of my dearest college friends. And I invited him, and he never went home. And so it's the eulogy. It's like he didn't go home because I was his home.
Oh, Eva, don't start me off this early on. Oh, mate. But that is kind of gorgeous, isn't it? And I'm one of these people. I'm quite impulsive, as you know. But when you know, right? And oh gosh, I can feel it. I can feel it coming through the screen. This is going to be a tough one, huh? Yeah. I'll hold your hand through it, okay?
So yeah, he didn't go home. It was hilarious. I told somebody the next day that I had met the person who was going to marry. I introduced him to my parents maybe 3-4 weeks later. We just were.
And you've described him as a goyish Viking.
Oh no, he was a gentle giant.
No.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's a gentle giant. So yeah, he was he was so tall, and he was so sweet and kind. I think when you're that tall, you don't have to necessarily be any more big.
No.
And he's very gentle. He worked in mental health. He really worked with people in psychiatric crisis. and he was really great in a crisis. And so I would say to people, he was the therapist you didn't want to meet, because if you were meeting him, you were, in deep
Pretty.
blue.
But what an incredible job. What an incredible thing to do with your life, to help people in psychiatric crisis, because it's a difficult job, and it must
It's
take a special
really
kind of
hard.
person to do that.
Yeah, it's a really hard job. And when he died, he had left his job working for the adjacent county, and he was going to start a private practice, because it was working in that kind of situation was so awful. And there was an opportunity to do that here in our hometown, and a lot of need for it. And his specialty was really youth and adolescents, and there's a great need for that.
Yeah.
He never got to realize that read, because he was going to start his own practice, and then he passed away.
Yeah. So in these 20 years that you were together, you obviously built a life. You had a son. Talk to me a bit about that. How, the life that you built.
Yeah, I mean, it was like she was my instant person and my instant best friend. And we moved a few times. We wound up. We were living in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Oakland, and then we wound up moving back to my hometown, which is near Sacramento, California. He got a job up here. Housing prices were more affordable, which is funny because people complain a lot about my city being expensive. And I was able to keep the job that I had in the Bay Area and commute down there once or twice a week. So we kind of built a new community around some of my old community. Some of these dear college friends I mentioned that met him immediately. 3 of the 4 kind of core people happened to come back here at the same time. And so I had that. And then we built a life. He worked in the county where we lived. He had some other jobs. I kept my Bay Area job. That ended. I started working, doing kind of public affairs communications for an association in Sacramento in the capital. We had a child. We did all.
What sort of dad was he?
He was great. I mean, he was funny. And it's funny because I'm sure we're going to talk about my partner, Russ. And it's interesting to kind of see the difference of how they related to him. And, Lars was little. So they would do things like, Lars was very interested in technology. So like they would sit and practice coding on the computer together. Or Terry loved to take rides. We lived kind of in farmland. And so the two of them would drive out into farm roads. And even now, especially when I was teaching my son to drive, when we take these drives, he would tell me, oh, we were here. And how I went there.
So pretty hands-on.
Very hands-on. I think it was really the best of Terry.
Yeah. And that comes as a bittersweet memory, doesn't it? Because you had those 10 years where he was this brilliant dad, and then, which is brilliant and you're grateful for it, but it almost makes the death harder because they were engaged and they were involved. And I sometimes think if your father is very distant and you don't see them Monday to Friday because they're working so much, the impact maybe is different. I don't know. I'm not sort of doing a comparison. Now,
some would say, we think Terry had a really awful childhood, which is probably why he wound up going and working with people. And so I think one of the things which is really amazing and healing for him is that we had a child, and his child is growing up in a really different situation, more continuity, stability, love. And so I think part of the joy for Terry being a father is also just being able to kind of change the story and change the view.
Yeah. It's called what they say. It's being the cycle breaker. Is that right? Is it cycle generation? Yeah.
Yeah. And Lars is really broken that.
Yeah.
A generation being Terry's younger that we're not healthy, and that's something I'm really grateful for.
So, tell me, what happened?
So Terry was a giant person, and I used to always say, like, when you're with somebody who's 6'10", it's like you're being married. You're married to a Great Dane. Right? The Great Dane are beautiful, amazing, and they're very gentle, and they often don't live long. And it's just hard on your heart and your organs. And Terry had a number of different health conditions just going on in general over a long time, and he really wasn't taking care of himself. He had gotten really out of shape. He was really overweight. He wasn't feeling good. His heart was enlarged.
How old was he when he died?
He was 54 and 17 days.
I love how precise you are.
I remember right afterwards, Lars, our son, calculated the date that I would outlive his dad.
Oh.
So that was, as we all reached, some of us died, and we might have been older than our spouses, but for a lot of us, they might have been a little bit older. And so when we reach those dates, they have a lot of power.
Yeah. And I'm thinking he's 54, he's a man. So there is a tendency, and I'm not generalizing with everybody, but to not take their health seriously, to think I've got years ahead of me to think about that. And actually what we're realizing is that you don't have lots of years to think about it. These are things that it will impact you as young as 54. Wow. So what happened in the lead up to it? Was he feeling unwell or anything like this?
Good. He was really not feeling good. He had left his job. He was going to take time to sort of try to get healthier and be better. And he rented an office, and he was doing all these things to get ready to practice. And he just didn't feel good. And he just wouldn't get off the couch. Like, he just was feeling horrible. And, and two weird things happened. One is, the night before he died, we had this kind of big, heavy conversation about what had been going on, and, that he would take care of himself, and he was asking like what went wrong. And we were lying there, and he was holding me, like, he was spooning me, and we were talking. And I remember thinking, I hope I always remember his voice. He had this great, deep voice. I mean, I don't know where that came from. And he was dead within 11 hours. And then the next day I was at work and got to work, and there was a crisis at work. It was a crisis anyways. And I called him, and I was having a quick conversation with him. And I said, look, I really so glad we talked last night, and please call the doctor. Let's, try to, kind of figure out what's going on. And I said, I love you. And I hung up. And that was the last thing I said to him was, I love you. And it must have been about 7:30 in the morning. Our son walked out the door at about 8 o'clock in the morning to walk down the street to go to school, because his little elementary school was walking distance. And Terry died between 8:15 and 8:30 in the morning. I mean, Lars had just left him, and so grateful.
Yeah.
It didn't happen while he was there. And then I couldn't get, and then, a couple hours into work, I tried to reach him. I couldn't reach him. I looked on Facebook to see if he'd been active on Messenger. He hadn't been active on Messenger, and I just started to panic.
And did you immediately panic? Did you immediately go to sort of worst case scenario?
So it took me a little while. And then I did, and I got in my car, and I drove home, and I called my mom, and I said, I can't reach Terry. He's dead. And she said, you are crazy. I said, no, he's dead. I know this in my heart. And I walked in my house, and I entered the back door and walked over there. And he had died in the entryway. And before I even called emergency services, I called her and I said, I told you, Terry is dead.
Oh my goodness.
And the other thing, which is weird, is for years I would always say, I felt like I had this weird feeling I was going to be a young widow. And I would say, well, I married this giant. He's like a great name. I'm going to be a young widow. And when I would hear stories of other people sort of in my peripheral world who were widowed young, I would just have this like, ooh, this is going to be me someday. And it's like, I feel like, and I said this in the eulogy while I had somebody read it for me. It's like, I knew immediately when I met him that he was my person, and I knew when he was dead. And our life together was bookended by those two very clear, knowledge in my being.
So does that, in your mind then, were you sort of meant to be together for that period of time? Or do you, I'm wondering whether you sort of believe in the fate and this is how it was meant to be.
Yeah, I do. I think I do not like, and we all hear this, things happen for a reason. We all, especially in the widow world, or they're in a better place. F you. I don't believe that there's one soul being. I really don't.
No, I don't. How could there be?
Yeah, how could there be? Especially for those of us who have now gone on, and other people who we feel like, of course, they're in our life, and we love them dearly, and they are our person or our partner. But I feel like I was supposed to meet Terry, and he was supposed to be my person, and I can't imagine not having Lars.
Yeah,
he is the love of my life.
Yeah, I get that. Boy mum, right? They talk about dads and their little girls. You show me a boy mum that's not wrapped around a little finger.
So I believe in fate. I think in some ways I do. I'm Jewish, not super religious, but I am very cultural. And it's a huge part of my identity as an individual. And there's this idea of reshaped, which is some people think it as that you're full made, and other people take it as it meant to be. And my mind, like he lived my shares. And and I also think, Terry had such an awful childhood, and um I feel like when he died, his soul had done everything he needed to do. That he had done enough, and his being was done.
Eva, can you, if it's not too difficult, just tell me a little bit about walking into the house that day? I know that this is probably quite
Yeah.
triggering. I don't like that word, but there isn't another one.
Yeah. I mean, so, I walked in, I was sitting sort of in what was our breakfast nook. It's been where my desk has lived since I was pregnant. And the largest room is my old home office. So I pulled in the driveway. We have a long driveway. I pulled in the driveway. I walked in the back door and noticed some weird things on the ground. Like there was an iPhone charger in a weird place. And I walked in and through, and my kitchen is right here. And I walked up in front of where I'm looking, and there he was lying in our entryway, wearing shorts, clutching his chest, with, the bruising that's indicative of a cardiac event.
And what happens then? I mean, I know in the UK we'd ring in an ambulance and they would come. Is it the same there?
Yes. Yeah. They hear it's 911. I don't know what their number is that you call. And I don't know, for a lot of us, there are things that trigger us. And for a long time, I mean, even to this day, when I hear sirens, it makes me a little nauseous.
I interviewed, funny enough, an American lady yesterday, and for her, it was the heart machines, the beep, beep, beep. And she said, even watching films, television, that noise comes on, and instantly it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very weird.
Mine is police knocking at the door on TV shows, that when they do the door knock. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. And
so what did you do? Talk me through that moment, because obviously you're going to be distressed and is your brain kind of immediately going, Lars, because I know for me that was the first thing was, shit, the kids.
Well, so what I did was I first called my mom and said, I told you so.
I
told you so. And she said, of course you're right, Eva. These were about the funny, weird things you said in life, of course.
Of course, that one's right, yeah.
I had a neighbor who I kind of knew from her schedule would probably be home. I think I called her because they needed to go someplace. And then I called a dear friend who was the mom of a friend of ours and told her what happened and said, when it's time, I want you to pick him up from school.
And did you say to her, don't say anything? Did you have a plan of what she was going to tell Lars?
At that point, no. And what she did say was, your papa's really sick. I need to pick. That's why I'm here. Why are you here? Well, your dad's really sick. I need to take you to your mom. And, what's the thing is when, he walked in the door, I mean, so we're at my neighbors. They left. It was me and my mom and our dog, who had been here for 6 hours with the dead body. And, we didn't do it.
Just awful. Ever. And at 10, I've gone really goosebumpy now. You're going to make me cry, I think. At 10 years old, it's a really interesting developmental stage because they're not in high school, they're not teenagers, but they're also not little children. So where little children, they can't kind of comprehend what's happened really in its full magnitude. I'm wondering if you're okay to talk about it, because I know that when it comes to the kids, that's about as near the bone as it goes. But I'm just wondering how a 10-year-old Lars responded.
He was amazing. I mean, we sat and talked to him. My mom offered to spend the night with us. My dad had only been diagnosed a month before with Lewy body dementia.
Oh, God, that's awful.
Yeah. And so, at that point, he still actually was driving, but we stopped cruising after that. And so, she was going to set him up so that she could spend the night. He was still okay overnight by himself. And she brought us, we wound up having dinner together. And I said, go home to Grandpa. I need to do this alone. I need to spend this night here with just Lars.
That's brave.
And, we both, we didn't want a lot of people in the house. One of the funny things is we're sitting there and my neighbors and my mom starts calling people. She called my high school best friend. And when she answered the phone, she said, Eva. And she called on my phone. Eva, I was just thinking of you. And my mom said, it's not Eva, it's Yasmin. I mean, to tell you something. It was like she was, clued into us. And she lives in Southern California, not in LA, but she lives in Santa Barbara. And she dropped it in her car the next day. And then she texted and she said, I'll be there at 5 tomorrow. And she got in her car and she drove. And so she answered the door. She went to the grocery store. I only had very close people come by.
So you had almost like a sort of a guard, you know, like a shield between you and the rest of the world a little bit.
I needed that. I mean, some people really want a lot of people in. I really didn't. And I didn't want a lot of food dropped off. Lars is super picky. I'm lactose intolerant and I don't need to eat a lasagna or cheesecake. And he had friends that came by to see. I mean, there were several of his friends that came by, and it wasn't like they were talking about what happened, but they just wanted to be with him.
Come and sort of be around and yeah.
And, you know, sort of maybe 3 or 4 days later, and the day before he was going back to school, he said, Ma, I feel really weird. I'm starting to feel normal. And I said, that's okay, sweetie. I'm glad. I said, you know, we are now going to live simultaneously happy and sad. And so it's great that you're feeling normal because I want you to be happy.
That's made me go goosebumpy. And you were able to say that to him within days of this happening. That is so powerful.
I remember sitting with him, even in those first days, and he was talking about the different ways that we all got this. And he said, Mama, we are all experiencing it differently. You had the shock with your eyes because you found Papa. I had the shock with my ears because you told me. And Sophie had the shock with all of her senses because she was here when he died. Sophie's our dog. And, you know, she was with him. And
what an emotionally mature little boy.
I said to him, hey, Lars, we're going to live with our dad somewhat close together. My father is still alive 6+ years later.
Oh, he's still alive. Gosh.
He's still alive. And Lars said, oh, no, Mama, you know, it's really different. You had Grandpa your whole life. I only had Papa for 9 years, 10 months and a week. And I was like, you're right. That is true. He's like, so it is different. Like we're experiencing the grief different. The loss of our fathers is going to be different. And he was very articulate immediately about that. That doesn't mean he wanted to walk for that.
Were you as a family sort of, I'm wondering with Terry being a therapist, but were you quite open about talking about feelings and quite mature and sort of, I don't mean content necessarily, but I'm thinking I've got 4 children and they're all very different. And my eldest is very grown up. So we have quite in-depth conversations about feelings and stuff, and we have done since he was young. Was that the environment that you had prior to this anyway?
I mean, I grew up in a family where everyone talks about things, and everyone, you know, like that's just sort of how we are communicative people. That is our nature. I think Lars less though, especially now he's 16.
Oh, wrong, 16-year-old boy. They don't communicate with anyone, do they?
Well, he does, but like, you know, he doesn't tell me his deepest, darkest.
No.
Sometimes. Although we have an agreement that he will share things about what's going on at school or tell me about what's going on with his friends. And the agreement is that he speaks honestly to me and that I do not, reveal his confidences.
Yeah.
And then one thing, if there's something I think needs adult attention, I would have a conversation with him before I would contact a parent. But it's really important that our confidence is solid.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about this as well. And I think this idea, I want my children to be able to come to me, even if they've done something awful or that they perceive to be awful, because that nothing that they can tell me will make me stop loving them, you know? And I think to grow up in an environment where they know that ideally I'd rather they didn't do any bad, terrible things, but they're human, they're going to make mistakes. And I want to be the person they run to.
You know, his teenager. So for years I've been saying, when you're a teenager, you're going to do dumb things.
Mm-hmm.
Do dumb things smart.
Yeah, just don't do as many dumb things as I did. And that would be a start.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, yes. I mean, he's very articulate about some of these things, but it's also private. And you know, when he went back to school, he did not want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, kids say the most insensitive. And you know, he came home and told me a kid asked him if he had liked his dad.
If you what? Liked him?
He liked his dad. I mean, just because imagine these are 9 and 10-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Not really sure. But he didn't want to talk about it at school. He didn't want to talk about it with his friends. I mean, I think all of this, everybody knows, but it's not something that he shares. Whereas I talk about it frequently. I talk about my husband all the time.
Same. Yeah, but I do think that's different. And when I actually interviewed a friend of mine whose dad had died when she was 11. So she'd just gone up to the equivalent of high school here. And she kind of opened my eyes to a child's grief a bit more, because I sort of feel like I've got the little kid stuff figured out, but it's that sort of pre-teen bit. And one of the things she said to me is about not forcing the grief, letting it come. And there's a lovely analogy called muddy puddles, that children will jump in and out of their grief in a much more kind of intermittent way than us. But I really believe that communication is the key, especially with even young children. It's giving them a place that they can talk, but not forcing them to talk. It's quite a fine line, isn't it? Quite fine balance.
He has not wanted to go talk to anybody professionally.
No.
And so I repeat, every once in a while I'll check in about that. And I always say, when it's time and you want to do this, then great, you'll do it. But I don't think that you force, especially a kid, to go to a therapist and have a conversation. I think when he's ready, that resource will be available to him. And I want him to start that he can do that on his own terms and, kind of figure out what that means to him and how he's going to process it.
And in terms of, your own, I'm going to say it, healing journey, in terms of recovery, because it is a recovery from grief. It is. You have to recover. You are broken. And I know that you do a lot of yoga and things like that, big yoga fan. What else have you done? Did you have therapy?
Yeah. So, I talked a lot about recalibration. Like I was recalibrating.
I like that, recalibrating.
Yeah, I do a lot of yoga. I remember when Monica, my high school best friend, showed up, I said, I'm thinking about going to yoga the next day. And Mars looked at me and said, Mana, I want you to go. You need to go to yoga. And so I went to yoga that very next day. And I think you've heard me kind of in our group talk about my widow twin here in Davis, whose husband was very tall. Her boys, my son doesn't play water polo now, but he did. And they played water polo. We met at yoga. She happens to also be Jewish and married to a Viking.
Wow.
And so I told her, and so she wound up going to yoga a few days after her husband passed away, and she called and she said, would you come with me to that first class? And we said, of course, let me cancel my meeting and I will come do that. So I've done a lot of yoga. I did some therapy, not a ton. I think our group was really
we were our own therapists, weren't we?
The most important healing. And I really actually now, and I think we all do this, when there's somebody in our periphery, in our community who becomes widowed young, I really try to reach out. I offer resources. I offer support.
Grief Sherpa.
Yes, Widow Sherpa. And so I think that's been really healing. And then when I was doing my dating, I started this very funny private email blog about my funny dating adventures. And a lot of it was about the dating, and a lot of it was about grief. And I found that dating actually also triggered some grief and helped me process some grief. And as weird as that sounds, I think that was an important part of it.
And talk to me about dating. Why not? Let's go in on that. I like a bit of dating talk. So what persuaded you to dip your toe back into that murky world?
I'll say something funny. So as I shared, I always had this feeling I was going to be a young widow, and I would joke about that to Tara. And so I said, well, so when I have to date, I'm going to have my profile, and this is what it's going to say. Tall, secular Jewess, looking for Viking, must read the New York Times. So there's my running joke. So literally when I wrote my profile, I used that.
Did you?
Yeah.
So did you sort of feel like Terry had a kind of hand in it in some way?
I hardly dated when I was young. I didn't have my first date until I was 21 years old. I had one serious relationship before I met Terry. And so I really just have I was in a sea of California girls. I was not what is sort of wanted.
And we were such innocents as well. It feels silly because we were in our 30s, 40s when this happened, but we felt like complete innocents because we didn't grow up in the world of internet dating. It didn't exist when I was a teenager.
I went to the cafe.
Yeah.
I spotted this man walking down the street, and we organically met in the wild.
Yeah. I met Ben at work. How old fashioned is that?
Very great. It is funny. It's I called my little private email blog Widow in the Wild.
Did you? Nice. I Wids in the Wild, don't I?
Which is also kind of a funny play because in our group, when we get together and we
Wids in the Wild,
we parrot it's Widows in the Wild. And I've been really fortunate to meet a number of members of our group. And it's funny, we're talking about a trip after my father passes. And so the idea is maybe Paris and London. And so
yes, do. And you must let me know because I'm only an hour from London as well.
Yeah. The only way I did it was online. I live in a small town where I grew up. It was 65,000 people. And even though it's 65,000 people, it's a small place. I had grown up here. Terry had worked in the mental health world around here. He was 6'10" and stuck out like a sore thumb. My mom was a divorce lawyer, and so everybody knew my story, right? And so it's a weird thing because it's a college town, so you have a lot of sort of college students. You have a lot of kind of old retirees like my parents, and then you have sort of the family thing. There's not a lot of dating happening. I didn't want to date in my pond, so to speak.
No.
So the island thing really worked. Initially, I dated people in the Bay Area because I had been down there and it just
Oh, so you like set your search to a different area. That's clever.
Actually, at the suggestion of a friend. And that really worked for me. And interestingly, the first man I dated, I'd worked for this association, a lobby that did lobbying for cities. And this profile I looked at was a man who was not quite tall enough for my criteria.
How tall was he? What's your threshold?
Tall.
Just really tall.
And he was also Jewish, and it said he worked for a small city. And so I sent him a message and said, hey, what city do you work for? Because I know cities. Turns out he worked for small Bay Area cities, but he had begun his career in city government working for the association that I worked for before Terry died, and had been in the city world for a long time. And the funny thing is, when I got hired at that organization, they put something in a newsletter, and he read it and he thought, oh my God, they actually hired another Jewish person. Just, we're not.
No way.
And then a few months later, it was a conference. And he was working for a city in Southern California at that point. He had left that organization. Anyways, he was working in city government, and he was standing with kind of one of our staff people who was in LA. And he said, oh, who is that? And she said, well, that's Eva Spiegel. And it was like, and so he had actually seen me for a decade before we met.
No.
And I never noticed him because he would see me at conferences and I was running around, and I said, was I wearing a gray suit? And he said, yes, you were always wearing a gray suit.
And moving at the speed of light.
And moving at the speed of light. And that actually was a really sweet way to have this begin, because it's very scary. So there was some context of commonality. We were born 2 weeks apart the same year. We had some similar cultural backgrounds, similar professional backgrounds. We knew people in common. It didn't last, but I really feel grateful for that experience. It was
because it can be quite, we talk about it being this cesspit in dating, but I think, again, as a widow, we are vulnerable, and we are, like I said, we are babes in the wood. We don't know how online dating works. We don't expect to have penises sent to our inboxes. It's a bit much. And actually, for you to meet somebody that is kind and gentle and a sort of introduction back into that world, because so many people dip their toe in, get bitten, and think, no, that's not for me. So then, after that relationship, you must have met your current partner?
Yeah, that was at the beginning. And interestingly, in my weird, precise memory thing, the date of my first date with that man, 4 years later on that date, I connected with Russ.
Oh.
It was, I was out there in the wild for 4 years.
And were you trying to date in that time, or did you sort of give up at periods because it was horrible?
Sort of on and off. I felt like I'm a person who's wired to be in a partnership. Not everybody is, right? But
I get them.
And that was, I didn't feel like my life as a kind of a woman beyond being a mom was over because Terry was. That was really important to me. And I
agree.
When we talked about it, that I needed to be a renewable resource. And it was really, I had to be a renewable resource for both of us. Mm-hmm. And so one way I was going to do that for myself is I was going to date. And that was important. Funny thing, he said to me, it was probably maybe a year and a half of my dating, when I would keep everything very private. He said, he asked if I was dating somebody, and I was at the time, although that thing ended very shortly thereafter. And he said, I knew you were, because, when you always say you've got plans and you're very quiet about it. He said, I would like you to not lie to me about when you're dating. If you have a date, I want to know if you're dating somebody. And if and when there's somebody special and you want me to meet them, I would like a month's notice, because I need to process.
A month.
And I need to process and prepare to meet them.
A full 28 working days. I like that.
And I thought, okay, that's fair enough. I think that's a very, I said, thank you for telling me what your needs are. And I really respect that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what was he, like 14 at the time?
No, he was 11.
Oh, so this is quite early. So, oh God, even more impressive then. Wow.
Yes. And he also said to me, I'm okay with you dating, Mama, but I don't ever want you to get married again. I only want Papa to be your only husband. I don't know how I feel about that now, but I was like, okay, thank you. Like, I'm like, thank you, Leslie, for telling me how you feel. Like, I always say that to him. Like, I really try to respect it.
Yeah. And
Again,
the fact he felt able to say that to you instead of just being angry or pushing you away, which is a very common reaction from a child if they're not happy about their parent dating.
That one in the beginning of dating, but this was sort of after it had been going on for a while. And I think that's really important is, we are individual people. We're also parents. And so how do you balance those two things? And I really like to listen to what Lars is saying, acknowledge what he's saying, and take that into consideration. And
and I think it is a tricky one because ultimately you're in charge, right? And we're the parents, we're in charge. And when it comes to dating, it becomes a bit of a minefield because you're not just dating for yourself, you're dating for somebody that can fit into your own existing dynamic. And B, you've got all sorts of things to consider. What if you bring a predator into the house? What if they're violent? Obviously you wouldn't invite that in normally, but you are thinking you're not a young free spirit anymore. You're a unit. And it does take enormous guts to take that step. But you're right. Not all of us, some people are quite happy on their own. And I will hold my hand up and say, I'm not one of them. Now, it doesn't mean I want to be with somebody for the sake of it, but it means I want that feeling of being in a unit, a family, that connection. And I fortunately found it again. And I think sometimes when you dip into online dating, it's so horrible that you kind of know that's it and the shutters come down. Whereas sometimes you do have to be a little bit persistent, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I actually think that online dating is really positive. Like, I hardly dated, but I think that the online dating kind of gives you an opportunity to encounter people you wouldn't encounter. Kind of, you can broaden sort of I was dating people that lived 70 miles away from me. I was able to find them. They were able to find me.
I suppose, yes, you can cast a wider net, as it were.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a really positive tool. It gets a lot of bad rap, and you have to be super selective. Like I had a list of what I was looking for. I was a
shopping list,
very clear on sort of who I am, what I wanted, what I didn't want. And there were sometimes I dated people because I wanted that experience of that, and I was really clear. Like, I don't think that this is a long-term thing, but I was gonna have the experience, and that was positive too. And so being more centered in your own self about who you are, what you want, what works for your family.
Yeah, I get that. And it's almost, you are a different person, aren't you? So the person that you were when you and Terry married, I mean, despite the time that's passed, you're also changed beyond all recognition. That Eva's gone. So you're dating as a new person as well. Can I just ask what you had your height set to, your height criteria set to?
When we talk about Russ. So it was 6'2".
You are 6'1". That's going to narrow your pond a bit.
The Russ is 6'1", and so he likes to say that I lowered my height standard for him.
You know who else did that? Catherine Ryan, the comedian. I was watching her stand up and she said her husband's 5'11". So she was like, and he's gorgeous. She's like, he was single in Canada for this long because everybody's got their search set to 6 foot.
Yeah.
So and you met on a dating site. Now, what's this man's name?
His name is Russ. The funny thing about Russ is a couple of years before Russ and I connected, I had met a guy in Sacramento on the dating app who I really liked as a person, but we just didn't connect romantically. And this friend dubbed me his new old friend. And so this was kind of this running joke. Like, we both loved to cook and bake. He had standard poodles. I had a multi-poo. Like, we just became new old friends. And then he met somebody, which I was really excited about, not his outfit. And then it was the pandemic. And so, we didn't get to see each other in person a lot. But when his relationship ended with this person, he reached out and we just started hanging out together and baking and walking the dogs. And he started talking about this friend of his, and who had been recently separated. Russ has been married twice. And so long story short is when I connected with Russ online and there were some things that he mentioned, I thought, I wonder if there's a connection here. And so when I asked, how did he come to this area? And he said he went to work for Hewlett Packard. And I was like, oh, by any chance do you know so-and-so? And it turns out they did. And that was amazing. And
So
so,
this was the friend that your friend had told you about?
yes, but he wasn't, and he didn't think that Russ was ready for anything. And so, at one point I said, well, hey, you keep talking to this friend. He sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I just don't think he's ready. But we happened to meet. And so that was really actually great. So like literally, like we had somebody in common who I adore. And they'd been friends for 20 years.
And it means they're pre-vetted as well.
Edit as well. So yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing is right after Russ and I connected on this app and they had been messaging for a few days, he sent me a message and he said, my father's fallen. I have to drive to New Mexico, which is 1,200 miles from here. I'm not sure any back. I'm not going to be on this app. Here's my full name and my phone number. And if you want to text me. So I texted him and we texted all the way out to New Mexico. His father actually, he arrived in time and he was the one that sat with his father when he pulled his dad off life support. And he said, I don't know if we're going to meet or what this is, but I will always thank you for this kindness, because I really talked to him the whole way out about grief and death and, just random lifey funny things also.
Yeah.
But, I think for many of us, we become sort of more comfortable talking about death and loss and hard stuff because we have been through it. And that's why we become little widow showers or this grief service.
And I'm thinking now, like you and Terry met and sort of instantly the connection. And then you've met Russ and he's going through one of the most life-altering events, the death of a parent. And so immediately you've almost bypassed the small talk and the awkward coffee dates, and you've gone straight into like a deeper connection.
Well,
So how quickly did it turn into something new?
I think we texted and messaged. I mean, it must have been 2 weeks before we met in person. And so I think there was, we covered a lot of ground. And the fact that he was good friends with a good friend of mine also really helped. And so, I mean, it was totally awkward. I mean, there's so many like funny, awkward things you think about in the beginning or I mean, it takes time, even when you feel like, was this something special?
And did you tell Lars, and did you leave it the agreed 1 month before you introduced him?
So Lars knew, when I was going on a date, right? They met about 2 months after. And, like I was saying to Lars, I let you meet this person. What do you think? He's like, I'm not ready. I'm like, and Lars was old enough that and I did not introduce Lars to anybody before Lars. Russ is the only man that Lars has met. But I felt like, okay, at 14, if this doesn't work out, he's old enough. It's okay now. And so I think Russ had gone back to New Mexico to see his mom and was come back. His mom for maybe 2 weeks, a week and a half, whatever it was. And I said, well, when Russ is back, I'd like you to meet. And he said, okay. So we arranged a dinner. We met at Lars's favorite restaurant, which is a Japanese restaurant in town. Russ brought in a book about our local Sacramento Kings, which is Lars is a very big basketball fan, and that's his team. And so we had a nice little dinner and we got in the car and Lars said, well, that was fun. When are we going to see him again?
But of all the things that you think they're going to react, really big or really badly to, and then for him to just be like, yeah, no, that was cool. Yeah. He's a cool cucumber, that kid, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing was probably 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in my house. I locked myself out of the house because I was in the backyard gardening, left my phone inside. I do wear an Apple Watch, which I've had now so if he needs to reach me, he can do it immediately. That was, I think, a lot of us with this sudden unexpected deaths.
Yeah.
The trauma of not being able to reach your person is big. And so
I have the same.
That's why I wear an Apple Watch. And it's different now. He's older and the kid hardly looks at his phone. But I heard the phone ringing. I'm outside and locked. Like I'm having to run around, get the spare key, and I get inside and the phone's gone. Well, in that time, instead of calling my mom, which he normally would in such a situation where he can't reach me and he was panicking, he had called Russ. Because I had given Laura Russ's contact. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, that's amazing that he is like, I can't reach my mom. This is the person I'm going to call.
Yeah. And that he feels comfortable doing so.
Yeah, when we had a conversation, after, when you have young children and you have to, there are lots of legal things you have to do. So, not only are you setting up sort of the will, but it's also who is going to take your kid if rather than something happens. My parents are older and my dad's not doing well. So, the designated person is actually the person who came and got Laura Shoes School that day. And so recently I need to update this documentation, and Laura just 18 now, so it's different. And I said, Lars, I want to talk to you about something. If something happened to me before you were an adult, would you like us to be your guardian? He's like, well, of course. Like, how could it be any more? So it's a very wonderful, they have a really wonderful bond, and I am so grateful. And I feel like I chose well for the two of us.
And does Ross have any other children?
He has 2 daughters. One is 24, one is 28. I haven't spent a lot of time with them. They live in the Bay Area, so.
And what are your plans together? Do you think, are you living together?
We live together. He moved in. And we registered as domestic partners, which is really lovely.
I saw that.
It means he can put me on his insurance, so it's very logistical. I feel like at this point, long term, if he's my person, whether that becomes a legal thing at some point, that maybe it may not. There's
third time lucky.
What?
Third time lucky for him.
Third time, exactly. Third time's a charm. There's some reasons I think I need to wait a bit, just sort of logistical reasons. And I want to make sure that Lars is okay with it. I think he would be now.
Yeah, sounds like he's accepted as a sort of part of the furniture now. Yeah. I know my eldest, who's just a little bit younger than Lars, he said to me that when I first met John and, John kind of came into our lives, he said he acknowledged that he put up a barrier because he didn't want this man taking me away. And I think that's something that you have to make so clear when you're dating, when you've got children, is even if this person ends up being really special to me, they're never going to come between me and you. You will always come first. And even though our kids were quite little, when John and I got together, we sort of said to them, are you comfortable with this? Are you happy with this? Does this make your life better, essentially? And they all said yes. And back then we said, if anybody isn't happy, then we will not pursue you. You have these conversations now. No, they don't get saying it now. But back then, when you're building a family, they have to feel like they've got some voice, some autonomy in this, because you're talking about their lives, aren't you?
Yeah. Russ, if things work out, Russ will be part of Lars's life longer than Terry was.
Yeah.
It was, when Lars turned 15, I thought, oh my gosh, 1/3 of his life has been lived without his dad. And every year that gets longer. I did have a man who canceled our second date. He had been divorced. He didn't have kids. His ex-wife, I think, had a kid. And he said, well, I just feel like, you're a parent. And so you're not going to put me first on Saturday. How are we going to go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning? How are we going to do this and that? Because your kid will come first. And I thought, okay, well.
Nicely swerved.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Next. And what does life look like for you now? So you're in a relationship, you're happy, Lars sounds like he's thriving and you're working. And what do you think, I suppose I'm trying to figure out, what do you think was the most instrumental part of your healing? Do you think it was the writing or the support you've had online or your friends? What do you think was the best bit? Yeah, like a sort of holistic, all of it.
All of it. And I feel like I'm still at the same. I was actually texting this morning with Rebecca, who I'm very close with.
I love Rebecca.
And I said, when there's some other, there's some family, Russ and I both have elderly parents having crises at the moment. And so, I've got some work stuff going on that's causing you some boost right now. And I said, what's interesting is when you're widowed, in some ways, you're more prepared for sort of life's ups and downs, right?
Because what's the worst that's going to happen, right?
You've been through catastrophe. On the other hand, your being is just a little more raw and sensitive. And so it's this weird dichotomy of being extra strong, and I hate the word resilience, I'm not going to use that, and then also a little more sensitive and raw. Because the reality is catastrophe happens, but that does not mean that life doesn't continue to move forward, and other crap happens that knocks us off our lives, that makes our heart hurt, that causes us pause, or brings up the grief. And that's sort of the reality of living. It's like the happy and sad duality that I was talking to Lars about very early on.
It's something that I've kind of latched onto, I guess, this idea of you are going to be sad for the rest of your life, but you can also be happy, you can be frightened, you can be joyful. There's all lots of other emotions that will exist around it. And I think once you accept that, that is so fundamental to getting better. and being able to embrace this isn't the life we expected. It's not the one that we, this wasn't sold to us. That was the other life.
Well, and you can hear you say, until death do you part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a line and it's thrown around, and holy smokes, that is really true. Until death do you part.
It is the chapter title of my book on dating, again, is called Till Death Us Do Part. And because I felt the same. I was like, but why are people judgmental? Because they literally did the only thing that you can do, you're meant to traditionally do in marriage, which ends a marriage. And yet if you were divorced and dating, people wouldn't have an opinion on it. It's a very strange...
People have lots of opinions. I mean, I really try. People would say the most ridiculous things, like, have few hours, are you sad your dad died? Or did you like him? And I really try to give people a lot of grace, in terms of death is really awkward. People aren't sure what to say. People are curious and they ask invasive questions, not because they're not nice, but because they're human beings. And so I really try to give people grace in terms of their reactions.
What do you think's worse, when people say nothing or when they say something stupid?
Probably when they say nothing.
Yeah, I agree. Because at least they're trying, right?
What is amazing to me, and I don't know if you still have this experience, but there are, it's even within the last year, I bumped into people who I randomly hadn't seen, who didn't know. And then I have to have what I call the dreaded conversation. At first it's like you're bombarded all the time. And I live in a small town.
And you forget some people don't know, right?
You forget some people don't know. Not everybody's on social media where they would have seen their post, or they might, for whatever reason. And so at first you're bombarded all the time. You go to the grocery store and have a conversation. When you are in the doctor's office, but then it slows down. And so now it's like, when that happens, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm still having this conversation or having to tell somebody. And
I bumped into some people at my daughter's dance competition at the weekend, and they live in where I used to live, which is literally half an hour away, but in England we don't really travel outside our areas. And so I haven't seen them for a long time. I haven't seen them since I used to go to a playgroup with my middle child before Ben had died. And it was that real, obviously they knew, but it was that real separation of these two different lives coming together. It was very strange. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. And the fact that people in my life now didn't know me before as well, that this version of me doesn't exist in their world. It's a very peculiar process.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend in my neighborhood who we have lived in the same neighborhood and were walking our dogs the same path for all these years, but we really only connected a few years ago. And we spend a lot of time together now. She's really dear, and she said something about, she kind of just based on what she knows, she didn't see that sort of the loss, like that was sort of in the forefront. And I was like, actually, it really is. Like, it is always in the forefront. We move forward, we don't move on, we integrate it. She's also been divorced, and so we were having this conversation. When you're divorced, you have these memories that are really clouded by the dissolution of a marriage, right? And so you can't sort of go back and sort of celebrate those. But when you're widow, even if there were things that were hard, and Terry and I happen to be in a really close spot when he died, and because he was not Jim, but that container of your marriage and your love is still intact, and those memories are still intact. And so you can kind of celebrate that in ways that
it's a very different thing to a divorce, isn't it? And I know one of our widowed pet hates is when people compare being widowed to like being divorced, because and I know divorces can be traumatic and messy and horrible, but it's not the same.
And it's just different. And I really like when people said, oh my God, that's so hard, or especially because I had, like, my dad was diagnosed, I had some work stuff going on at the time, and Terry died. And I said, everybody has their part in the loss, and this is mine. And I really believe that. Like, I don't believe that sort of the things that I've gone through are any harder or worse than other people, because I just don't know. But I think to be human is to experience hurt and loss. And this,
you're very insightful, and you've got a very kind of open heart, haven't you? You see the good in people, and I can really, I knew it really from sort of knowing you in our Facebook group, but I can feel it more now. Eva, it's been incredible to hear your story. I am so grateful to you for coming and telling me. Do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap up? Because I'm always conscious that I might think we're done and other people might think there's loads to talk
Well,
about.
it is, I can't imagine my life any other way now. I mean, it's amazing to think about. And I was thinking this morning, it's been over 6 years for me. And I cannot believe it's been over 6 years. And all the things that have transpired. This when I was trying to figure out what are they going to wear? Was they going to wear black? Was it not? I mean, we're allowed black and gray. And I
Same.
and it's sure. And I realized these were two items that I had before. So it's funny, like here I am. I'm wearing jeans that I bought last fall, but I'm wearing a sweater and a shirt that was bought before 2018. And it sort of was an interesting sort of combination of the way we live, right?
Yeah.
It's the combination. I live in the house that Terry and I bought in 2004. Lars has lived in the house where he was conceived. And now Russ lives here. And so it's this interesting thing when you're in this kind of in the widow world, is you live sort of in the before and the present all the time.
Yeah, they're very intertwined.
They're very intertwined. And I think that's a lot of who I am now.
Just actually, while I've still, how does that work with your relationship? Because Russ isn't a widow, and obviously my only experience of this is with another widow. So how is he receptive to talking about Terry? Is he do you have space to do that?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's really for the folks, those of us who have met somebody that, has been previously partnered and that person's, they're divorced. It can be, I think it's probably a intimidating thing in some ways to date a widow. And I really love Lori's interview. And she really talked about that very articulately and sort of how she and Fred connected and sort of how Fred relates. And I think that's very, that is an important thing to me, is to have a partner who is relating like Fred, which is my marriage. In some ways you're always still married to that person. You hold that in your heart. I have, on the bookcase right behind me, there's a picture of me and Terry on our wedding day, and there's a picture of me and Russ. And Russ is very respectful and loving about that. And we talk about Terry all the time. There's a memorial tree garden that an organization my community has. It happens to be right near my house. And on the 4-year anniversary of its passing, I had the tree planted. And I go there all the time and I talk to the tree, and I know that Russ has gone there and
has he?
Yeah.
See, it's stuff like that really matters. It seems such a small gesture. And weirdly, one of the things I've just written is about Laurie meeting Fred, and the fact that she said, he asked, are you single? And she said, I'm widowed. And he said, what was his name?
Oh,
yeah.
So I will tell you that when she had told, I knew that story from before your interview, and it really stuck with me. And there's somebody I had some dates with and didn't work out, but I remember him. He asked me about Terry, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's like, and I was really taken by that. It was such a kind gesture. It wasn't like, how did he die? He said, tell me about it.
Who was he? Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And when this woman in my community who was very similar to me, whose husband was 6'6" and passed away unexpectedly on a Thursday morning, the next day at school, kids were asking Lars what happened. And Lars said, you're asking a question of curiosity. That's not the best question to ask. And I thought, because I always say, sometimes you ask a question of compassion. Don't ask for curiosity. You want to be compassionate. And I think that's, Russ is very compassionate about Terry and our loves, what he was like. They're really different people, and their lives were really 180 degrees. And yet here I am. They both do love, and Terry loved 80s music, and that's really Russ's genre. We're going to go see the English Beat in a few weeks, which is exciting.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
And ran maybe a year ago. And so...
Well, I took my daughter to see Kylie Minogue. And that was my 80s. She was my 80s thing, Kylie Minogue. So it's my first concert. So I took my daughter to her concert for the first time. Right. Well, Eva, do you have any social media or anything that you want to mention before we wrap up here?
My Instagram is private, and so okay. Facebook, and so I think
that's fine. I like to ask because sometimes people have got books out and things, and they would like to mention.
With all the dating, and I had this blog. I wrote 106 pieces, and the last one was Russ. I thought about writing a book, And when I started that process of writing, I was like, do I do a public blog? And I thought, I don't necessarily want my whole private life out there, especially the dating stuff. And I wanted to be able to write freely. And so I kept that all private. And I'm happy to share with people. And sometimes I email pieces to people all the time because some of the stories are hilarious.
Well, now we've spoken, I would like to have a look, you see, because I as I said to you, I don't like to know too much ahead of time, but now I want to know.
I will tell you, and not for the public, maybe from public reporting, but the funniest dating story was there was an emergency room doctor who lived about 27 miles away from me. He was an avid cyclist, which there's a lot of cycling around here. It's very flat. So he said, it was like the second time we were going to get together, and he said, well, how about I needed my miles in, and what if I, bite your house for mine? I was like, okay, great. Sure, whatever. So we cycled up 27 miles in the hot of this area, which it can be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer.
Sweaty.
He asked to take a shower. No.
Oh my God.
We pulled out 3 Cliff Bars, packets of electrolytes, and 3 condoms.
Oh my goodness. 3 as well. He was optimistic.
Like Park, who was also in our group as the Trojan Rider.
Oh my God.
I'll tell you look on the story, which is several times I got some of those pictures, which I never wanted. And so this man sent me one. So I texted the back hours later. I said, I've been thinking about your picture. Text the, oh, you have? Yes. I just got to ask you one question. Because ask me, what possesses men to send these photos? And he says, well, Eva, men are like peacocks. We like to be seen.
And with that, the episode concludes. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your incredible insights and your wealth of experience, which I wish you didn't have. I wish your husband hadn't died, but I so admire you for taking this tragedy and being so determined to build another life, another version of your life. And for the way that you speak about Lars and the way that you've been so open with him on this journey, I think that's really admirable. And I think I take my hat off to you. It's been an honour to hear your story. And I'm sure everybody who's listening will agree.
And I feel really grateful. And I remember even in those first moments that I had a lot of gratitude for things. I remember thinking I was grateful that it was me who found Terry. And it didn't happen when Lars was here. I was grateful that my neighbor was home and we could go to her house. I was grateful for my friends that he, and I think it's, just knowing like things could have been there also. And there were ways in which, we were protected in that process. And that's really important.
And this idea of being grateful even in the depths of despair is quite difficult to even imagine. But I try and do this with the gratitude. And actually, I don't write it down, but with my daughter in the car to school, we're like, right, 5 things we're grateful for. And we try and do this because I don't know how it works, but it does, doesn't it? This idea of even in your darkest moments, finding something, the glimmers of hope. And that's what we're doing here.
And I hate being overly positive. And so it's really okay to have those moments where you're in the middle of the depth of the crap and you talk about it.
What happened is awful, and actually it doesn't stop being awful. No, I agree.
Both things you can be grateful for. Like I live in the house where we bought dinner. I didn't lose my home. My life has remained very stable. And that isn't true for all widows. I mean, some widows really go through some really tough things that, we were prepared. And I am grateful for that. And then yet life goes on and how things happen and you get really upset and wrapped up in it, and that's okay too.
Yeah. And that's the scary thing, is it? That you're not immune from terrible things happening. That was a bit of an eye-opener to me. I thought, well, that's it now. I've had my run of bad luck.
Yep. One more.
Okay. Well, for any listeners out there who have been affected by the episode, you can reach out to me. I can pass any messages to Eva. And of course, I will be back with you. I'm saying very committedly at the end of the episodes, I'll be back next week. You see, this is my plan to put out one a week. So I will be back with you very soon, hopefully next week. But for now, you take care of yourselves out there. Lots of love and goodbye.
All right. Thanks, Rosa.